The hangar was never meant to feel like a stage, but that morning it did. Cold, white lights flooded the concrete floor, reflecting off polished metal and casting long shadows beneath the aircraft's open engine cowling. The jet sat motionless, massive and silent, like a giant holding its breath. Around it, nearly 40 soldiers and technicians had gathered without being told to, drawn by the same instinct that pulls people toward a spectacle. Boots lined up behind the yellow safety stripe, arms folded, faces alert, curious, already leaning toward judgment. At the center of it all stood a young black recruit in a worn blue maintenance suit, his name patch slightly frayed at the edges, one hand resting on the engine as if he were steadying himself rather than the machine. He hadn't asked for attention. He hadn't announced anything. He had simply listened, leaned in, and touched the aircraft. That was enough. "Step away from my engine." The voice cut through the hangar cleanly, without strain. General Victoria Hale didn't shout. She didn't have to. Authority came naturally when the room was already prepared to agree with her. Conversations died mid-sentence. A few soldiers straightened instinctively. The recruit removed his hand slowly, not out of defiance, but because he was still thinking. That hesitation lasted less than a second, but it was enough to register. Enough for smirks to appear. Enough for someone in the back to slide a phone out of a pocket. General Hale approached with measured steps, the polished heels of her boots clicking against the concrete like punctuation marks. She stopped just short of the recruit, close enough that he could smell the sharp scent of her pressed uniform. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked, her tone almost conversational. He swallowed once. "Ma'am, I heard something off during the cool-down cycle. The vibration didn't match the diagnostic readout." A ripple of amusement moved through the crowd. It wasn't loud laughter yet. It was the kind that lives in exhaled breaths and exchanged glances. The general turned slightly, making sure others could see her expression, then laughed. Not harshly, not angrily. She laughed like someone who had just been handed an unexpected joke. "You heard something," she repeated, savoring the words. "That's interesting." She looked past him to the assembled personnel. "Ladies and gentlemen, apparently we have a gifted ear among us." A few chuckles broke free. Phones came up higher now, no longer pretending. The recruit felt the heat rise in his neck but kept his posture straight. He had learned that reacting only fed moments like this. General Hale folded her arms, studying him the way someone might study a broken tool. "This aircraft costs more than this entire hangar," she said. "It's been inspected by certified engineers, reviewed by 2 diagnostics teams, and approved for replacement parts. And yet you think your hands belong on it." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Around them, the hangar had shifted from workspace to arena. People were no longer waiting for a solution. They were waiting for an outcome. Someone whispered, "This should be good." General Hale smiled wider, sensing the energy. She took a half step back, giving him space, but also giving the audience a clearer view. "Tell you what," she said lightly. "I'll make this simple." She paused, just long enough for silence to settle. "Fix this engine," she said, then tilted her head, "and I'll marry you myself." The laughter exploded. It wasn't restrained anymore. It echoed off steel beams and fuselage panels, bounced between bodies and walls. A few soldiers laughed too loudly, eager to show alignment. Others laughed because not laughing felt dangerous. Cameras captured every angle. The recruit stood perfectly still in the center of it, the words hanging over him like a sentence already passed. The general raised her hands slightly, as if calming a crowd at a performance. "Relax," she said. "I'm kidding. Mostly." More laughter. "But here's the deal," she continued, her voice sharpening just a fraction. "If you can't fix it, you'll admit, right here, that you don't belong anywhere near equipment like this. And if you walk away now, well, that tells us everything we need to know." It was a trap built with precision. Either choice led to humiliation. Either choice confirmed a story the room was ready to believe. The recruit's chest tightened. He could feel eyes pressing in from every direction, feel the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders. Somewhere behind the line, a soldier murmured, "He's done." General Hale had already turned away, confident, her job finished. In her mind, the lesson had been delivered, the hierarchy reinforced, the clip secured. Stay with us because this story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The recruit didn't move. He stared at the engine, not at the general, not at the cameras. To anyone watching, it might have looked like fear or shock. But inside, something else was happening. He was replaying the sound he had noticed earlier, the faint, uneven hum that didn't belong, the subtle vibration that no checklist had flagged. His grandfather's voice surfaced in his memory, calm and steady, telling him that machines spoke long before they failed, if you knew how to listen. Around him, the laughter began to fade, replaced by impatience. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted their weight. General Hale glanced back, irritation flickering across her face. "Well," she said, "are you going to say something, or do I need to assign you back to cleaning duty?" He lifted his head then, finally meeting her eyes. There was no anger on his face, no plea, just a quiet focus that didn't match the moment they were trying to force him into. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "with respect, the engine isn't broken the way everyone thinks it is." A few laughs sputtered out and died awkwardly. The general raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "Yes, ma'am." He took a breath. "If you'll give me a few minutes, I can show you." Silence stretched, thin and uncertain. General Hale looked around, aware now that the room was watching her too. Backing down would look like weakness. Letting him try would only prove her right when he failed. She smiled again, sharp and confident. "By all means," she said. "Show us." The recruit stepped back toward the engine, every movement suddenly magnified. Cameras adjusted. Fingers hovered over record buttons. No one spoke as he placed his hand on the metal once more. What they didn't realize, what none of them were listening for, was that the engine had been waiting for this moment too. The first thing the recruit did was close his eyes. To the people watching, it looked like hesitation, maybe even fear, but it was habit. It was how he'd learned to survive moments when the world demanded an answer before it deserved one. The noise of the hangar faded into something distant, replaced by a quieter memory, the kind that lived beneath muscle and instinct. He could almost feel the heat of a small garage back home, the air thick with oil and rust, the steady tick of cooling metal after an engine had been shut off. That garage had belonged to his grandfather, long before uniforms and ranks and polished boots entered his life. His grandfather used to say engines told the truth long before people did, that numbers lied when pride got involved, but vibration never did. The recruit had learned to listen there, standing on a milk crate because he was too short to see over the hood, his small hands guided by larger, scarred ones. That was where he learned patience. That was where he learned survival. His name was Marcus Reed, though almost no one in this hangar bothered to use it. To them, he was a recruit, a background figure, someone assigned to sweep floors and move crates, someone whose job was to stay invisible. Marcus hadn't grown up dreaming of military glory. He grew up in a house where money ran out before the month did, where his mother worked nights, and his grandfather's pension barely covered medication. When his grandfather's lungs finally gave out, it was Marcus who learned how to read the oxygen machine by sound alone, who knew when it was about to alarm before the screen changed. Listening had kept his family afloat in ways no one here could see. Joining the service hadn't been about status. It had been about stability, health coverage, a steady paycheck, a chance to make sure his mother never had to choose between heat and food again. The irony wasn't lost on him now, standing in a place filled with machines worth more than his entire neighborhood combined, being laughed at for daring to touch one. He opened his eyes and studied the engine again, not the size or the cost, but the small details everyone else overlooked. The subtle discoloration on one panel, the way the metal seemed to hold tension rather than damage. Around him, the crowd waited, some impatient, some excited, all convinced they already knew how this would end. General Hale leaned against a tool cart, arms crossed, her posture relaxed, confident in the inevitability of failure. She had built her career on control, on command, on never being questioned in rooms like this. Marcus represented everything that threatened that image, not because he was loud or rebellious, but because he existed outside the story she liked to tell about who belonged where. From the edge of the hangar, someone watched with different eyes. Sergeant Daniel Cross had been stationed here long enough to recognize patterns that weren't written into manuals. He was close to retirement, his uniform less crisp, his movements slower, but his attention sharper than most. He had seen Marcus before, late at night, lingering near aircraft long after his assigned tasks were finished, not touching, just observing. Cross had noticed the way Marcus listened, the way he tilted his head slightly, like a mechanic from another era. He hadn't said anything then. Speaking up rarely changed anything. But now, as the laughter died down and uncertainty crept in, Cross felt something shift. Marcus stepped closer to the engine, ignoring the cameras, ignoring the weight of expectation pressing against his spine. He placed his palm flat against the casing again, grounding himself. His heart was steady, not because he was fearless, but because fear was familiar. He had felt it in hospital waiting rooms, in eviction notices, in the quiet moments when his mother pretended everything was fine. This was just another version of that pressure, dressed up in uniforms and rank. The general cleared her throat. "You have 5 minutes," she said. "After that, we're done entertaining this." Marcus nodded, not looking at her. 5 minutes was more than enough to confirm what he already suspected. As he listened, his mind traced the path of the engine's last flight, the rise in pitch, the slight lag in response, the way the sound changed under stress. It wasn't catastrophic failure. It was obstruction. Something small, something overlooked, something that didn't show up cleanly on a screen, but announced itself to anyone willing to pay attention. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Marcus reached for a simple inspection tool rather than the advanced diagnostic tablet everyone expected. Someone snorted softly. General Hale smirked. This was exactly what she'd hoped for, a performance that would collapse under its own inadequacy. Sergeant Cross shifted his weight, stepping just a little closer, his eyes narrowing. He recognized that tool. It wasn't flashy, but it was effective. He had used it himself years ago, back when experience mattered more than presentation. Marcus adjusted his grip, his movements calm, methodical. Every choice he made was shaped by years of being underestimated, by learning to double-check, to move carefully, to never give anyone an excuse to dismiss him. His grandfather's voice stayed with him, reminding him that survival wasn't about speed, it was about precision. Behind him, someone whispered, "He's really trying." Another voice replied, "This is embarrassing." Marcus heard neither. He was somewhere else now, focused on the quiet conversation between metal and motion. Sergeant Cross took a breath and did something he hadn't planned on doing. "Give him space," he said, his voice firm, carrying just enough authority to matter. A few heads turned. The general glanced over, annoyance flickering across her face. "I don't remember asking for commentary," she said. Cross met her gaze evenly. "Ma'am, if we're going to let him try, we might as well let him do it properly." The hangar fell into an uneasy stillness. It wasn't defiance, not openly, but it was something close. General Hale studied Cross for a moment, weighing the room, the cameras, the optics. Then she waved a hand dismissively. "Fine," she said. "Let's see how far this goes." Marcus exhaled slowly. He hadn't expected help, but he accepted it without acknowledgement. Help, like respect, was something you learned not to depend on. As he worked, fragments of his past threaded through his focus. The nights spent studying manuals borrowed from libraries, the hours listening to old engines long after others had given up, the promise he'd made to himself that no matter where he ended up, he wouldn't stop paying attention. The engine responded subtly, almost imperceptibly, but Marcus felt it. The tension shifted. The wrongness revealed itself more clearly now. This wasn't guesswork. This was recognition. He straightened slightly, eyes opening, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something else in the hangar besides amusement. Curiosity. Sergeant Cross noticed it immediately. The way Marcus's posture changed, the way certainty replaced caution. Cross felt a quiet certainty of his own take root. He had seen this before. Not often, but enough to know what it meant. Somewhere deep inside the engine, something was about to be exposed, and with it, the truth about who really belonged in this space. The hangar felt smaller as more people drifted in, drawn by whispers and half-formed rumors that something unusual was unfolding. What had started as a moment of mockery was quietly turning into an event. Technicians from adjacent bays slowed their work. Officers passing through found reasons to linger. The semicircle tightened, bodies pressing closer, the yellow safety line now a suggestion rather than a boundary. Phones stayed raised, lenses trained on Marcus as if he were already a character in a story someone else would tell. The air grew thick with expectation. Not hopeful, not kind, but hungry. General Hale sensed the shift and straightened, reclaiming the center with a subtle adjustment of posture. She had commanded rooms far more hostile than this, but something about the way attention clustered around the recruit irritated her. Control was supposed to be effortless. This felt like resistance, quiet but persistent. "Let's keep this moving," she said, glancing pointedly at her watch. "You're burning daylight." Marcus nodded without looking up. He could feel the clock now too, not the one on the wall, but the invisible countdown that came whenever a decision hardened into consequence. Every second he stayed there narrowed his options. Every adjustment he made pulled him further into a space he might not be allowed to leave, with dignity intact. He was past the moment of pretending this was an exercise. The arena had closed. Someone near the back whispered, "Is he actually doing something?" Another replied, "Doesn't matter. He'll fail." The words brushed past Marcus like static. He was focused on a different voice, one that lived inside his chest, steady and insistent. His mother's voice, tired but proud, telling him not to back down just because others expected him to. His grandfather's voice, softer now with memory, reminding him that fear was loud, but truth was patient. He adjusted his stance and reached deeper into the engine bay, listening again, confirming what he had already sensed. The vibration pattern wasn't random. It repeated, slightly off cycle, like a heartbeat skipping in the same place every time. General Hale took a step closer, arms still crossed, her expression composed but sharper now. She didn't like silence, unless she controlled it. "You look very confident for someone improvising," she said. Marcus finally turned toward her. "I'm not improvising, ma'am," he replied calmly. "I'm confirming." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The word carried weight, implied intention rather than guesswork. Hale's eyes narrowed. For a fleeting moment, something unreadable crossed her face, a flicker of doubt she quickly masked with a smile. "Confirming what exactly?" she asked. "That the diagnostics are pointing at symptoms, not the cause," Marcus said. A few technicians exchanged glances. That wasn't an ignorant statement. It was a precise one. Hale laughed lightly, but the sound landed differently now. "You're saying every system we ran is wrong?" "No, ma'am," Marcus answered. "I'm saying they're incomplete." Silence followed, heavier this time. Sergeant Cross shifted again, closer now, his presence no longer accidental. He wasn't smiling. He was watching Hale as much as Marcus, reading the room the way he had learned to read storms before they broke. Hale felt it too. The subtle change in how eyes moved, how attention redistributed itself. She had intended to turn Marcus into a lesson. Instead, the lesson was beginning to look unpredictable. She raised her voice slightly, projecting authority. "Let's be clear," she said. "You're a recruit. You don't get to rewrite procedure." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I'm not rewriting it," he said. "I'm following it to where it actually leads." That was the moment the crowd leaned in as one. The challenge had shifted from spectacle to confrontation. Hale took another step forward, closing the distance, lowering her voice so it carried without sounding strained. "You're very close to crossing a line," she warned. Marcus felt the weight of that warning settle into his shoulders. This was the point of no return. He could step back now, apologize, let the laughter return, let the story end the way it was supposed to. He could protect his position, his paycheck, his mother's security, or he could step fully into the space he had already entered and accept whatever followed. He thought of the nights he'd sat in silence beside a hospital bed, listening to machines and knowing before anyone else when something was about to go wrong. He thought of how it felt to speak up then, to insist, to be ignored until it was almost too late. He exhaled slowly. "I'm already across it," he said quietly. The words didn't challenge. They stated fact. Hale straightened, surprised despite herself. For a brief instant, she saw not a recruit, not a problem, but someone who wasn't afraid of her. That realization unsettled her more than defiance ever could. She recovered quickly, scoffing. Fine, she said, raising her hands slightly as if granting permission. Explain it to everyone, since you're so sure. Marcus turned back to the engine, aware that every eye was on him now, not waiting for a punchline, but for clarity. There's an obstruction in the airflow path, he said, speaking clearly, not loudly. Small enough to avoid triggering a shutdown until stress increases. That's why the failure happened when it did. A technician frowned. We checked for that. Marcus nodded. You checked where it usually happens. He paused, then added, This one's lodged deeper. Hale felt another flicker of doubt, sharper this time. She hadn't anticipated coherence. She glanced at the diagnostic board, then back at Marcus, measuring how far this had already gone. Cameras continued to record, capturing not just Marcus's hands, but her reactions. The room was no longer hers alone. And you think you can fix it, she said flatly. Marcus didn't hesitate. Yes, ma'am. The certainty in his voice drew a collective breath from the crowd. Someone swore under theirs. Hale searched his face for bravado, for desperation, for anything she could use to reframe this as foolishness. She found none. That frightened her. She took a step back, giving him space, but also conceding something she hadn't meant to concede at all. You have until I say stop, she said. One mistake, and this ends. Marcus nodded once. That was all he needed. The hangar settled into a tense quiet, the kind that comes before impact. Sergeant Cross folded his arms, eyes fixed on Marcus, a faint, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement passing between them. Marcus placed both hands on the engine now, not hesitantly, but with purpose. The choice had been made. Whatever happened next would be seen, recorded, remembered. There was no retreat from this moment, only forward, into the truth the machine was ready to reveal, and the consequences that would follow when it did. Marcus moved with a deliberate calm that felt almost out of place in a room braced for failure. He didn't rush to the diagnostic console or call for a cart of specialized equipment. Instead, he began by listening again, closer this time, fingertips grazing the engine casing in small increments, pausing at each contact point as if mapping a conversation only he could hear. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. General Hale watched with her arms crossed, chin lifted, the faintest crease forming between her brows. This wasn't the frantic fumbling she'd expected. This looked intentional. He's stalling, someone whispered. Marcus ignored it. He adjusted a panel latch and leaned in, angling his head to catch the subtle resonance that had been bothering him since the cooldown cycle. There it was again, a thin, irregular flutter beneath the dominant hum, like a string slightly out of tune. He straightened and reached for a simple inspection mirror and flashlight from the nearest cart, tools so ordinary they felt insulting in a room that worshipped complexity. A few technicians snorted. Hale let out a breath that might have been a laugh. That's what you're going with? She asked. Marcus didn't answer. He guided the mirror into position, adjusting the beam until it skimmed along a narrow channel deep inside the airflow path. The angle was unforgiving. He had to hold his wrist steady, muscles burning as seconds stretched. On the mirror's edge, a faint glint appeared and disappeared as he shifted. Something reflective where nothing reflective should have been. He felt a surge of confirmation, followed immediately by resistance. The fragment was lodged tight, not loose enough to fall free, not obvious enough to trigger alarms. I see it, he murmured, mostly to himself. A technician nearby leaned closer. See what? Marcus hesitated, then withdrew the mirror slightly to reposition. In that instant, the flashlight flickered and went out. A ripple of sound moved through the crowd, sharp and immediate. Someone laughed, louder than necessary. There it is, a voice said. That's the moment. General Hale straightened, satisfaction flickering across her face. Looks like your 5 minutes are up, she said. Marcus felt heat rush to his ears, not from embarrassment, but from urgency. The failure was minor, trivial, but the timing was brutal. He replaced the flashlight battery with hands that stayed steady despite the eyes boring into him. "I'm not done," he said quietly. Hale raised an eyebrow. "You were warned," she replied. "One mistake." Sergeant Cross stepped forward half a pace. "Battery failure isn't a mistake," he said evenly. "It's equipment." Hale's gaze snapped toward him, sharp and cold. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then she looked back at Marcus, weighing optics against pride. Cameras were still rolling. Ending this now would look abrupt. 30 seconds, she said. "Make them count." Marcus didn't thank her. He reinserted the flashlight, steadied the mirror, and angled the beam again. The glint returned, clearer now. A tiny metallic fragment, no bigger than a fingernail clipping, wedged at a precise point where airflow accelerated under load. "Foreign object debris," he said, louder now, letting the words carry. "Small, embedded, causing harmonic distortion at higher stress." Murmur rippled through the technicians, skepticism thinning into interest. Hale's lips pressed together. Marcus reached for the diagnostic console then, not to run another scan, but to access a rarely used configuration menu. "I'm not tearing it down," he said, anticipating the objection. "I don't need to." "You're not authorized," Hale began. "I'm adjusting airflow," Marcus interrupted, still respectful but firm. "Within tolerances." He entered a sequence with practiced precision, adjusting inlet guide vane positions and bleed parameters in a pattern that made a few engineers frown and then freeze. "That's not standard," someone muttered. "It's not," Marcus agreed. "But it's allowed." He paused, hand hovering over the confirmation command. The room felt suspended, as if gravity itself had shifted. Marcus listened one last time, aligning what he heard with what he intended to do. Then he executed the sequence. The engine responded with a low, controlled surge, not a roar, but a deep pulse that rolled through the hangar floor. Pressure readings fluctuated. A warning tone chirped briefly, and then stabilized. Marcus watched the values with intense focus, adjusting timing by fractions of a second. The sound changed. Not dramatically, but unmistakably. The irregular flutter softened, then vanished, replaced by a smoother, more coherent resonance. A technician inhaled sharply. "Do you hear that?" Another nodded slowly. Hale's arms uncrossed without her realizing it. "What did you do?" she demanded. Marcus didn't look up. "I reversed the pressure gradient just long enough to dislodge the fragment without damaging the blades," he said. "It's clear now." "That's impossible," someone said. Marcus glanced back at the mirror, angled it once more, and held it up so the nearest technician could see. The channel was clean. No glint. No obstruction. Silence fell hard and fast, the kind that swallowed sound rather than waiting for it. Marcus moved to the ignition sequence, hands steady, posture composed. "I'm bringing it up slowly," he said, as if briefing a team rather than defending himself. He initiated the start. The engine spooled, low at first, then building, smooth and even. No stutter, no lag. The sound filled the hangar, not harsh or strained, but confident, controlled. Readouts settled into green across the board. Someone let out a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. The engine reached operational idle and held it, steady as a heartbeat. Marcus watched for several seconds more, then shut it down cleanly. The sudden quiet felt unreal. Then the room erupted, not in laughter, but in stunned murmurs that quickly turned into applause. It began with one technician, then another, hesitant at first, then surging as disbelief gave way to recognition. Sergeant Cross clapped once, then again a slow, deliberate rhythm that others followed. Marcus stood still, hands at his sides, absorbing the shift like a physical force. General Hale remained silent. Her face had gone pale, her expression stripped of performance. For the first time since she'd entered the hangar, she didn't know what to say. The truth had been revealed not by argument or appeal, but by outcome, undeniable and public. Marcus looked at the engine one last time, then turned toward the crowd. He didn't smile. He didn't bow. He simply met their eyes, one by one, as if inviting them to reconcile what they had believed with what they had just seen. The machine had spoken, and it had told the truth. The applause didn't explode all at once. It rose in uneven waves, uncertain at first, as if the room needed permission to believe what had just happened. Then it gathered force. Hands came together louder, faster, filling the hangar with a sound that moments ago had belonged only to the engine. Marcus felt it before he fully heard it, a pressure change in the air, the same way he'd sensed the engine's shift before the readings confirmed it. People who had been smiling at his failure now looked at him differently, their expressions recalibrating in real time. Phones stayed raised, but the angles changed. No longer waiting for a punchline, they were capturing proof. Sergeant Cross was the first to step forward. He didn't rush or dramatize it. He simply closed the distance, stopped in front of Marcus, and extended his hand. "That was exceptional work," he said clearly, his voice carrying just far enough for others to hear. "You trusted your skill when it counted." Marcus shook his hand, the gesture grounding him. The contact felt heavier than applause, more real. It was recognition without spectacle. The room seemed to take its cue from that moment. A senior technician followed, nodding once. "You just saved us weeks," he said. Another added, "and a lot of money." Their words stacked, each one quietly rewriting the narrative that had been built around Marcus since he arrived. General Hale stood apart, frozen near the tool cart she'd leaned on earlier. The confidence she'd worn like armor had cracked, leaving something brittle underneath. She cleared her throat, but no one looked at her. Not yet. The center of gravity had shifted, and the room knew it. Marcus felt the strange sensation of becoming visible, not as a novelty, not as a problem, but as a point of reference. Someone asked a technical question, then another. He answered them simply, without flourish, aware that every response reinforced what the engine had already proven. Hale took a step forward, reclaiming space out of habit more than authority. "That will be all," she said, her voice firm but lacking its earlier edge. The words hung awkwardly, ineffective. No one moved. Sergeant Cross turned toward her slowly. "With respect, ma'am," he said, measured and calm. "This isn't over." Hale's jaw tightened. "I believe I'm still in command here." Cross nodded. "Yes, ma'am. And command means acknowledging outcomes as well as intent." A murmur of agreement passed through the group. Hale felt it like a physical thing, the way the room no longer bent automatically around her. She glanced at Marcus, then away, then back again, as if seeing him for the first time. The recruit who had been entertainment minutes ago now stood at the center of a recalibrated order. Cameras captured her hesitation. That hesitation mattered. "You made certain promises," Cross continued, not accusing, simply stating fact. Hale's lips pressed together. The words she'd spoken earlier replayed in her mind, no longer clever, no longer harmless. They were evidence now. She exhaled sharply. "Those remarks were inappropriate," she said. The word felt small. "However," she added, searching for footing, "results speak for themselves." Marcus waited, his posture relaxed but alert. He didn't savor the moment. He understood it for what it was, a narrow bridge between past and future. "I'm not interested in jokes or favors," he said evenly. Heads turned toward him. Hale looked almost startled that he'd spoken. "I just want to work where my skills are useful." The simplicity of it landed harder than any demand could have. Cross nodded again, approval unmistakable now. "That can be arranged," he said, "effective immediately." Hale stiffened. "That's not your call." Cross met her gaze without flinching. "It is when safety and performance are involved." The words carried institutional weight, the kind that didn't need to be raised to be heard. Around them, the hangar felt different, lighter somehow, as if something oppressive had been vented out along with the faulty pressure. Marcus felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest, not pride exactly, but alignment. For the first time, the way he saw himself and the way others saw him were beginning to converge. He hadn't changed. The room had. Hale looked around, realizing the isolation closing in. The officers she expected to back her were silent. The technicians she'd relied on avoided her eyes. She nodded once, stiffly. "Very well," she said. "We'll discuss reassignment." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't gracious. But it was retreat. The crowd began to disperse, conversations buzzing with new energy. Marcus found himself surrounded briefly by questions and congratulations, then gently extricated himself, needing a moment alone. He stood near the engine, now quiet and compliant, and rested a hand against its casing. The metal was cool. The crisis had passed. Sergeant Cross joined him again, standing shoulder to shoulder, without ceremony. "You handled that well," he said. "Most people would have said more." Marcus shook his head slightly. "There wasn't anything else to say." Cross smiled, faint but genuine. "That's part of why it worked." Across the hangar, Hale spoke quietly into her phone, her voice tight. Marcus didn't listen. He felt something else settle instead, a shift inside him that no one else could chart. For years he'd learned to compress himself, to take up less space, to survive by staying just below notice. Standing there now, he realized he didn't have to do that anymore. Not because the world had suddenly become fair, but because he had proven, publicly and unmistakably, who he was. As the last of the crowd filtered out, Marcus remained, the echo of applause still lingering like a ghost in the rafters. The hangar returned to what it had been meant to be, a place of work, of precision, of purpose. But something irreversible had happened within its walls. The hierarchy had cracked, and through that crack, truth had emerged. Marcus straightened, squared his shoulders, and walked away from the engine, not as a recruit trying to belong, but as someone who knew he already did. The video left the hangar before Marcus did. It moved faster than orders, faster than explanations, faster than anyone could contain. By the time he reached his locker that evening, messages were already stacking up on devices he didn't check, fragments of the moment clipped and reposted, stripped of context and then rebuilt with captions that couldn't decide whether they were outraged or inspired. A few frames caught the general's laugh. Others froze on Marcus's hands, steady against the engine. The silence after the restart became its own headline. Inside the base, Command tried to frame it as a technical success story, a lesson in procedure and innovation. Outside, it read differently. It read like a reckoning. Within 48 hours, Marcus was called into an office he'd never been invited to before. The walls were bare, the tone careful. He was reassigned to a diagnostics team with direct access to flight readiness decisions, his badge updated, his schedule rewritten. The change felt unreal, not because it was generous, but because it was overdue. He thought of his mother when he signed the paperwork, of the way she would sit quietly at the kitchen table, counting bills, of how this single adjustment would mean she didn't have to choose anymore. Sergeant Cross remained a constant through it all, a steady presence who checked in without hovering, who understood that the loudest changes often happened quietly afterward. "You did what you needed to do," he told Marcus once, as if that settled everything. For Marcus, it almost did. For General Hale, the aftermath moved in the opposite direction. The same footage that elevated Marcus began to corrode her authority. An internal review opened, then widened. Not because of one joke, but because the joke had made space for others to speak. Patterns emerged, testimonies accumulated, assignments denied without explanation, talent sidelined for not fitting an image. The laughter that once protected her now worked against her, replayed in hearings where tone mattered more than intent. She wasn't dragged through the mud publicly. There was no spectacle of punishment. Instead, there was something colder. She was removed from operational command pending further evaluation. Her name quietly shifted to a different line on the organizational chart. The room she used to own went on without her. The cost arrived without drama, exactly as systems prefer. Marcus felt no triumph in that. He felt distance. He saw Hale once more, weeks later in a corridor she no longer commanded, her posture rigid, eyes forward. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The consequences had already been delivered by the same structure she had relied on. As the weeks passed, the story continued to travel, refracted through different audiences. Mechanics wrote in to share similar experiences, stories of being dismissed until something broke. Young recruits asked Marcus questions not just about engines, but about how to survive rooms designed to test obedience rather than insight. He answered when he could, careful not to turn himself into a symbol he couldn't live up to. The base instituted new review protocols, quieter changes that didn't trend but mattered more. Diagnostic teams were diversified. Listening became a metric, not just a metaphor. Sergeant Cross was invited to consult on training revisions, his nearing retirement postponed by a sense of unfinished work. Marcus stood before a group of trainees one afternoon, an engine schematic projected behind him, and realized he was no longer shrinking his presence. He spoke plainly, not performing, not defending, just teaching. The words came easily. At home, his mother watched a news segment that showed only a few seconds of the original clip, Marcus's face half visible, his name mispronounced. She recognized him anyway. She didn't call him immediately. She waited until later, when the house was quiet. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. He closed his eyes when he heard it, letting the weight of that land. The engine he'd fixed flew again, then others like it. The solution documented, refined, absorbed into procedure. His contribution became part of the system, no longer exceptional, just correct. That mattered to him more than the attention. Excellence, he understood now, wasn't the moment of revelation. It was what remained once the noise moved on. On the anniversary of the incident, Marcus returned to the hangar alone, standing near the same engine bay, now unremarkable, just another machine doing its job. He placed his hand on the casing out of habit, felt the steady absence of vibration, and smiled faintly. The circle had closed. Where he'd once been told to step away, he now belonged without question. The story continued to circulate, reshaped by each retelling, but its core stayed intact. A room had tried to turn humiliation into entertainment. Competence had refused the role. The cost of cruelty had been paid not through revenge, but through exposure. Systems, once seen clearly, had adjusted themselves. Marcus walked out of the hangar that day into ordinary light, carrying nothing but his tools and a quiet certainty. Excellence had always been there. Now the world had seen it, and then, just as importantly, moved on, leaving something better in its place.